This podcast is sponsored by the Tree of Life Memorials and Digital in Stone. This is a new platform to create digital memorials, environmental legacies, and fine art monuments. This way we could share the stories, preserve the memories, conserve the land, and connect the souls, because love never dies.
This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 45 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to offer an every-person viewpoint to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared to make difficult decisions when a crisis hits.
So welcome to this week's show. Please relax, get yourself something cheering to drink and some pie, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about football and whether or not your kid should play. Like the BBC, we see our show as offering entertainment, enlightenment, and education, and divided into three halves to address each of these goals. Our main topic is in the second half, so feel free to fast forward to that no chin-wagging section if you need to. Our topic this week is the view of the safety of playing football, especially for kids. In the first half, Charlie talks about the dignified transfer of members of the armed forces and our recipe of the week. In the second half, I'll be talking about football-related brain damage. And the third half, we are presenting funeral theater with our reading from the 2015 film Concussion. So, Charles, how are you?
Fine. Nothing that new in the big city. Or maybe it's like the groundhog, I just put my head in the ground. So, yeah. What about you? What's going on? What?
I find that just so hard to believe.
Yeah, especially since the ground here is concrete.
Yes.
Talk about the concrete jungle.
So the groundhog lives in the sewers, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yes. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, the official groundhog place here is out on Staten Island. Yes, there was a big controversy because, let's see, the groundhog on Staten Island saw his shadow. But I believe in recent years there's been a competitor in Queens, and he or she, the opposite, did see the, who knows? You know, I just don't follow groundhog news. I know I'm bad about that, but I just...
the one that we believe is Puxatawny Phil, right? Yes,
and...
So these jamokes from other parts of the world really just don't matter.
And I, after all these years, I still don't remember when it sees its shadow. It's an early spring, or the opposite.
I think it's the opposite, but
yeah.
I don't know if they got the software update that includes global warming and all of that.
Probably not. That seems to be on most people's back burners. But I know that supposedly we will have an early spring.
I heard that.
Yes.
I heard that. It was really warm here yesterday.
Yeah, it's supposed to be tomorrow here. Well, what day is it today? Yeah, I guess like tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow 50, and then the day after knocking on 60.
Whoa.
Yeah. We're having a heat wave.
Isn't it?
Yes. A tropical heat wave.
So what do you have for us in our first half, Charles, before you sing anymore?
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I tried my best, but see, I was cut off again. Okay. Marianne often talks about how the U.S. war in Afghanistan had been a hidden war related to the American people seeing evidence of the death of members of the armed services. During the Vietnam War, We watched the coffins being unloaded on the 6 o'clock news, helping to keep that war and its costs front and center. This week, though, the dignified transfers of Sergeant William Jerome Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Layden Sanders, and Specialist Brianna Alexandria Moffett was witnessed and recorded for all to see. These soldiers were killed at a remote U.S. outpost in Jordan in what the Pentagon said was a drone attack by an Iranian-backed militia. A dignified transfer is a solemn and dignified transfer of a service member's casket from the aircraft to an awaiting transport vehicle that ensures dignity, honor, and respect. In addition to family members, the President and Mrs. Biden, the Defense Secretary, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs were witnesses to the transfer. May these service members rest in peace, and let's offer a moment of silence to honor their sacrifice. And now, on to our topic of the week, football, and the national holiday of the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is the football game between the winning teams from the NFL's two conferences, the American Football Conference and the National Football Conference. As many of you know, Mary Ann and I are both from Detroit. So we were pleased to see the Lions almost make it. So close. Yeah. The very first Super Bowl dates back to January 15, 1967. And since then has become one of America's most watched sporting events. Millions watch what has become a national holiday of sorts. Many host Super Bowl parties or watch the game at bars and restaurants. The game is accompanied by a halftime show which features some of the biggest names in music. Super Bowl Sunday has become one of the biggest eating days of the year in the United States. Oh, so true. Americans consume millions of chicken wings, pizzas, and gallons of beer on this day. So if your next funeral lunch is for someone who loved the game, why not take Super Bowl fare? Our recipe this week is pig handy. Yep, you heard that right. It's made with thinly sliced pork belly cubes, but you can use thick-cut bacon instead. Rubbed with spiced brown sugar, baked and covered in teriyaki sauce and sesame seeds. You can bring the beer in your water bottle if you are so inclined. Woo, pig suey! Please go.
That's in honor of the University of Arkansas.
Arkansas?
Arkansas.
Arkansas. Okay, got it. So what?
So they have, their mascot is this huge pig, but it's not a pig. It's, what's the one that?
A wild boar?
Yeah.
Like certain politicians?
And I was going down the street one day there, and right next to me was the trailer with the wild boar in it. That sucker is huge. And so at the football games, for those of you who don't know about it, the University of Arkansas, they have the calling of the pigs. And that's how they call the pigs.
So is it just the one, or is it a gaggle of pigs?
I don't think you would want more than one wild boar.
So eventually is Mr. or Ms. Suey dinner?
Oh no! I mean, it
laid out
lives
the pasture.
In luxury. It lives. Oh, you mean like eventually?
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe it just goes out onto a farm to live. I don't really know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it just never dies because it's, a mascot.
Exactly. It's sacred. Do you remember Mark Latessa? Mark, anyways, his family had a farm. So we would all converge out there and they had a pig. So the pig just grew fatter and fatter, and it was decided that, once the pig, reached the right weight and size and everything, it would be dinner. And it came to time, and the farmer who, was there to look over everything, and, this pig had become part of the family, and just could not kill him. So there was still a pig roast, but store-bought. And the pig, I don't remember what we named him, was, the guest of honor, but respectfully, and just died a happy old age. I forgot about that.
That's how it should be.
Yes. Yeah.
It was funny. My sister did the same thing. They decided they were going to get a pig and raise it for food, and the kids got attached to it.
There we go. Yep.
And then they cried and begged for it not to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
That was the last pig they got.
So, folks, please go to our webpage for this week's recipe for Woo Pig Suey and additional resources for this program. Your tax-deductible donations are always welcome so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. And thank you in advance for making your donation at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks, Charlie. Here at Everyone Dies, we believe that knowledge is power. And not only do we want to offer you the information to make it easier for you to live with serious illness, die in a manner that fits with your personal values, and feel supported during your bereavement, but we also want you to live well, put off death and disability for as long as possible. We are clearly overachievers. Which brings us to today's topic of football-related brain damage. The information we have for you today is likely not going to affect current NFL players, but will help those with children make informed decisions about permitting your kids to join a football team. As with many choices we make when we're young, like smoking and diet, having unprotected sex, or wearing a seatbelt, playing football can impact our health and quality of life as an adult. Simply put, lifestyle impacts health. As a mom, I was cautious during my pregnancies not to eat or drink anything that could harm the baby. I nursed both kids, and the second until she was 2 years old, because the data documenting the benefits of children's long-term health and its association with breastfeeding was really, quite persuasive. I started reading to them when I was still pregnant, and then while I breastfed them, so they would associate reading with pleasure. I don't know, I read that somewhere. I enrolled them in Baby and Me exercises classes so that while they were little, they could learn to enjoy physical exercise. I told them the car couldn't move without everyone having a seatbelt on, and didn't let them have pop because it would stunt their growth. We modeled good health and gave them opportunities to make good choices. My point in telling you that is that from the time that we get pregnant, we look out for our children's health. But what do you do when your child brings home the permission form to play football when every year there are new studies documenting the negative long-term effects linking football and brain damage? After all, a sedentary lifestyle results in poor health. Making part of a team has been a positive social effect. Maybe everyone in your family played football, and the sport is a source of enjoyment and family bonding. As the parents, the decision is yours. But it's not without pressure from your child, the rest of the family, the school community. After all the other parents are giving their kids permission to play. I mean, really, what's the worst that can happen? Well, let me tell you. American football was first played in 1869 based on the rules of soccer. The modern era of football began after the 1932 NFL playoff game. Players then wore leather helmets, and the players were instinctively less aggressive and protected their heads. In the 1940s, plastic helmets became mandatory, but now modern helmets and face masks produce a less cautious game because the improvements in helmet technology had the unintended consequences as players weaponize their heads for tackling. In 1979, an unnecessary roughness rule was added for using the helmet to butt, spear, or ram any opponent, or if any player uses the crown top of the helmet unnecessarily. The leagues are protecting defenseless players, like a receiver catching a pass or a runner in the grasp of a tackler. In 1982, from tacklers using the crown of their helmet. Blows to the head during contact and collision sports like football, boxing, and soccer, as well as for military veterans, victims of physical violence, all of these cause injury to the brain, called traumatic brain injury, or TBI. TBIs are a serious medical condition with symptoms of dizziness, depression, having trouble sleeping, insomnia, memory loss, and other symptoms that could linger for months or even years. In a 1928 medical report, it described boxers with what was called then punch-drunk syndrome, and later called dementia pugilistica, with symptoms of unsteady gait, slurred speech, tremors, mental deterioration. And it became widely understood that it was the result of repeated, relatively minor blows to the head. In 1949, a British neurologist published a paper titled Punch-Drunk Symptoms, the Chronic Traumatic Encephaly of Boxers, which was the first use of the term CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And encephalopathy is pathology to the brain. Over the decades, it was sometimes suggested that dementia pugilistica might happen to professional football players too. Which brings us to 2002, Pittsburgh. And a neuropathologist named Bennett Omalu examined the brain of Mike Webster, an NFL Hall of Famer who died from a heart attack after a mysterious spiral into mental illness and homelessness. What he saw came to be known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE is a neurodegenerative disease identified in individuals with exposure to repetitive head impacts, which is essentially repeated traumatic brain injuries. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy results in tangles of a protein called tau to build up around the blood vessels in the brain. These altered tau structures collapse, causing the microtubules to disintegrate and the cells to die. This is different from what is typically seen in brains affected by aging, Alzheimer's, or any other brain disease. The symptoms of CTE include memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, anxiety, suicidality, Parkinson's, and eventually progressive dementia. These symptoms often begin years or even decades after the last brain trauma or the end of active athletic involvement. Research at the Boston University CTE Center announced in a 2023 study that they had diagnosed CTE in the brains of 345 of 376 of the NFL players studied. That's 91.7%. Now, this brain center, just to back up a little bit, was started in around 2002 and was a place where people could donate their brains to be studied. And in particular, they were asking football players who died to donate their brains to study this disease. Now, a 2018 Boston University study of 164 donated brains found one with CTE. So anybody can donate their brain to this brain center. And when they just looked at 164 of the brains that they had, they only found one that had this disease. Turned out that one CTE case was a former college football player. So these studies build on findings from 2017 study that showed CTE in 99% of the brains of NFL players, 91% of college football players, and 21% of high school players that were in this brain bank. Another study looked at the types of head impacts that increase the risk of CTE. The research team collected data from 34 previous studies of helmet accelerators used in high school, youth, and college football players. Now, these helmet accelerators are devices that measure the number, speed, and direction of impacts to the head during football while they're playing. The researchers used these data to create what they called a positional exposure matrix, or a PEM. This estimated the average number and types of blows to the head of a person that they would experience during a season for a particular playing position and level of play, including professional athletes. The team then looked at the relationship between these estimated impacts in CTE in 631 male brains donated who had previously played football. What they found: on average, the brain donors had played about 12 years of football and died at age 60. About 28%, or 180 of them, didn't have evidence of CTE in their brains. Another 63% had low-stage CTE, and 288 had high-stage CTE. Now, as seen in previous studies, the number of reported concussions was not associated with CTE incidence or severity. So the number of concussions a person got really had nothing to do with having CTE. However, the number of years playing football, as well as several factors measured by the PEM, were associated with CTE. What they found was that every additional year playing football was associated with a 15% increase odds of getting CTE. And for those who had CTE, 14% increase odds of severe CTE. What does this mean? So these results provided added evidence that repeated, non-concussive head injuries were a major reason for people getting CTE rather than symptomatic concussions. Meaning that if you have a symptomatic concussion, you know you have it because you feel awful. But with CTE, while you're playing, you don't know the damage that you're doing. They also found the force of blows to the head that football players experienced over their lives better predicted chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, than the number of concussions. These data indicate that for every 2.6 years of playing football at any level, doubles your risk of CTE. And the longer you play and the higher level that you play, the greater your risk. So you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but my kid's not going to make it to the, NFL. Well, when CTE was identified, the exact mechanism of why it occurred was unknown. They could see it in the slides of the brain, but they said, well, what's causing this? But it's now known that it's the multiple hits to the head and the longer you play football that are the risk factors. The worst forms of CTE showed up in players who absorbed the greatest cumulative force of hits to the head, meaning they were hit often and hard. Now, these are the individuals who absorb the hardest hits to the heads. These are the defensive backs, the wide receivers, and the running backs. If we do reduce both the number of head impacts and the force of those hits in practice and games, we could lower the odds that athletes are going to develop CTE. So as a parent, what are you going to do? So let me give you some things to think about here. A good place to start in situations of long-term effects of lifestyle choices is prevention. Think of it like the link between lung cancer and smoking. It took years for big tobacco to admit that they knew about the link between their product and its effect on health. But we can now apply that principle here. Prevention efforts such as changing rules of the game and making sure that kids start playing tackle sports at a much later age are a start. Now, brain health is considered the number one step toward overall health. We can't think of the brain as just an isolated organ that's disconnected from the heart or the joints, nor is damage to the brain the only risk that parents need to consider. Physical injuries such as ACL tears, arthritis, heart condition, musculoskeletal injuries, pain, and inflammation are also factors. Parents should ask themselves a series of difficult questions. How much risk is too much? How much scientific knowledge is enough when the details are still emerging? How much do you have to know before making up your mind? So here are some figures to think about. A high school lineman receives between 1,500 and 1,800 subconcussive hits each season. Someone who plays for 4 years of high school football can experience 6,000 to 7,200 subconcussive hits. Playing 4 years of college football additionally doubles the amount of hits. 12,000 to 14,400 hits to the head before a player has the opportunity to play in the NFL. If a player does get hurt and has a concussion during a game, the role that parents, coaches, and teammates and teachers can play in concussion recovery is crucial. The football culture is to shake off an injury and return to play. We're making men here. They're conditioned to play with pain. Players may minimize the extent of their injury in order to be allowed to continue to play in the game. So in 2006, Zachary Lindstedt was 13 years old when he suffered permanent brain damage. He collapsed during a junior high football game from brain hemorrhaging after returning to play 60 seconds after sustaining a severe head trauma. He's still in a wheelchair. If the injury is quickly identified, the athlete is removed from play, and they should have all the support services around them. If that happens, the odds of a good recovery are very high. The odds of a good outcome are very good if you have all the right things in place to take care of the student athlete. But a concussed athlete who returns to play before their brain is properly healed is more susceptible to sustaining an even worse injury known as second impact syndrome, a condition in which the brain is vulnerable to another, often more severe injury. 16-year-old Joaquin Waller died during a game 2 days after sustaining head trauma in practice. A medical examiner said neither impact would have been sufficient to cause death in the absence of another impact. Waller was cleared to play by his team-certified athletic trainer. Ensuring that the player isn't isolated after sustaining a concussion is critical and include finding ways to participate with and feel connected to their team and friends while they recover, or having a plan about how they'll catch up on any classwork that they may have missed. If your child has a concussion, you know your child best. You need to keep an eye on that kid. If you have any suspicion that they aren't progressing the way you think they should, they're showing signs of depression, they're starting to feel withdrawn. Remember, depression is a very treatable condition. A study by Jacob and colleagues published in 2023 suggested that adolescents who report concussions were at an increased risk of reporting poor mental health and suicidal behaviors. Male teens who reported 2 or more concussions in the past year were twice as likely to report a suicide attempt than males who reported 1 concussion. As parents, we need to closely monitor mental health behaviors in adolescents with repetitive concussions, especially those that occur in a close period. There are risks and benefits to any decision we make that involves our children. In the case of playing football, the benefits are pretty obvious in terms of the physical benefits like aerobic strength and conditioning exercise. Sports provide the emotional and social benefits of being on a team, which include improved mood, concentration, and better self-confidence. but the risk list is pretty long. And those are the ones that I'm going to talk with you about. So here are some things to consider as you make your decision. 1, there are tackle leagues for kids as young as 5 years old. Remember, kids' brains are not fully developed until 25. But because it's available does not mean it's safe. Signing children up to play flag football, though, at least until the 7th grade, can reduce exposure while still letting them play. They're still advancing the ball 10 yards and getting physical activity, which kids should have. But somebody's not hitting your head with every play. Flag football results in the same types of less serious injuries as tackle football, like sprains, muscular injuries, and bruises. Second, USA Football has instituted a heads-up tackling method to help avoid spear tackling, thereby reducing the incidence of spinal cord injuries. Third, drills like Oklahoma or Bull in the Ring are red flags. They typically involve running at one another at full speed, which experts say should never be done when we're talking with the kids. Know the symptoms of concussions, including nausea, vomiting, neck pain, grogginess, personality change, and difficulty concentrating. Most parents and even coaches don't know what those symptoms are. And as the parents who are sitting watching these games, we need to know what to look for. And if you're seeing that, make sure the kid is not still playing. Your child should not be playing for more hours than their years in age. For example, a 7-year-old should not be practicing and playing football more than 7 hours a week. Make sure your child learns the rules of the game. For example, in flag football, they should know that it's a non-contact sport and that tackling is not allowed. For younger children, emphasize having fun instead of focusing on competition. Make sure coaches are trained in safety and first aid and that an automatic external defibrillator, an AED, is available. Make sure your kids are wearing safety equipment properly. Like you see people putting their helmet on and just having it laying on the back of their head or something. It needs to be on, it needs to be strapped. And that the gear supplied by league or school is certified and in good condition. Check the football being used to make sure it's appropriate for your kid's age. If your child's experiencing joint pain, have it checked by a physician. If there's a growth plate injury, you want to have it treated promptly, as these types of injuries can cause problems later in life if not cared for properly. So while I can't give you, here's what you should do, I've given you a lot of evidence, scientific evidence and advice from experts in terms of the things to think about in terms of making the decision so that your child is safe while they're growing up, but also so that your child is safe into their adult years and their older years. The ages of death of the players in the NFL who have this disease can be anywhere from late 40s up till around 60, which is really too young to die. Any questions, Charlie?
No, just no. Wow, I knew a lot about this. I read something here, read something there, but for you to put it all together like that, that's, geez. It just also makes me think. I went out for football when I was in high school. So I went to the first practice, and I couldn't get in the building. The doors I was supposed to go to, they were locked. And then it later turned out that whatever the coach or somebody made an announcement, but a lot of us didn't hear that announcement that there would be no tryouts and everything that day, and I just never bothered to go back. I'm glad now I didn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's not, the brain injury is a huge part of it, but there's also with changes in the weather, it's so incredibly hot when they're practicing that they're even, having kids come during the evening hours, playing in the dark, turning the lights on and practicing then. The kids aren't drinking enough water. There are heat-related deaths. And it's just, Juliana played volleyball and they'd have to be there like at 5 a.m. to practice in the summer because it was so hot.
Right, yeah.
And you'd see the football players out there with all their gear running around and banging into each other. And I would just look at it and say, oh my God, that looks awful. I'm one for comfort. I'm built for comfort. But, and also it's not these traumas don't occur only during games because they're running into each other through the practices too.
Right. Yeah.
So make good decisions, parents. I hope this helped.
In our third half, today's funeral theater presents 3 scenes from the film Concussion, a 2015 American biographical sports drama film written and directed by Peter Landesman, based on the exposé Game Brain by Jean Marie Laskus, published in 2009 by GQ magazine.
Have you seen that film, Charles?
No.
I had never seen it either, but I said to David, we got to watch this film. It's really good. Yeah. It was really a good film.
Set during the 2000s, the film stars Will Smith as Bennett Omalu, a forensic pathologist who fights against a National Football League trying to suppress his research on chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, brain degeneration affecting professional football players. All right, so I'll be reading the role of Bennett, the forensic pathologist, and Marianne will be reading the role of Dikoski, who was the head of the pathology department. That is Mike Webster, the Pittsburgh Steeler.
Get to the point. I know who Mike Webster is.
He was 50. Diving birds hit the sea at 200 miles per hour, generating 1,000 G-force at impact. Each peck of a woodpecker produces a G-force of 1,000. 12,000 pecks a day, 85 million times over their lifetimes. Bighorn sheep. All these animals have shock absorbents built into their bodies. The woodpecker's tongue comes out of the back of the mouth, through the nostril, and goes around the top of its head. Basically, it's one big safety belt for the brain. Humans? Not one piece of our anatomy protects us from those kinds of collisions. A human being will get concussed at 80 Gs. The average head-to-head contact on a football field, 120 Gs. God did not intend for us to play football.
Let's keep God out of this. Do you even watch football?
Not at all. But I studied Mike Webster's position, the one in the middle, the most violent on the field. The slaps and the choking, the head is a weapon on every play of every game of every practice. From the time he was a boy, then a college man, through a professional career. The thousands and thousands of hits that weren't concussions. The running backs and the safeties, they're the fastest. Their speed multiplied by the speed of the men who hit them and the trajectories at which they hit him. The G-force created, the same as getting hit on the head with a sledgehammer.
Slow down the brain. Get to the brain part.
Mike Webster played 18 years of professional football. 90,000 blows to the head during just his professional career by my calculation. All this triggered a cascading series of neurological events that unleashed killer protein upon Mike Webster's brain. The tangles invading and then strangling his mind from the inside out, leaving him unrecognizable, even to himself. And before you ask me why it's not the same as boxers,
dementia pugilistica.
Why it's not the same is that when a boxer receives this kind of blow, it is once in a very long while, because he goes down and he often does not get up, and the fight is over. It is not over and over and over every day of every week, week in, week out, practice or game. I don't know the game. I have never played the game, but I am convinced playing football killed him. And there have to be others.
How do you know that?
Like common sense. But they're dead or lost, like Mike Webster was lost.
I'm not interested in common sense. The only thing that interests me is science. And science is knowing.
I know from these men's records their doctors think they have early Alzheimer's, which is statistically impossible because it isn't Alzheimer's. It's this.
Holy Christ. I don't like it. Actually, I hate it. But as a scientist, I can't deny it.
We need to tell them now.
The NFL? What, like call them?
Yes.
You know they will be terrified of you.
What for?
For being told. For knowing. I get it. You think you're being a good American. Listen to me. The city of Pittsburgh shelled out $233 million to help build its beloved Steelers a glorious new stadium while it was closing schools and raising taxes. These are not people who want to change the world. And this isn't some quaint academic discovery. Bennett Omalu is going to war with the manufacturer of a product that 20 million Americans crave every Sunday the way they crave water. The NFL owns a day of the week. They're very big. You've done great work. No one's going to blame you if you stopped here. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you how important your next move is.
No one's stopping anything.
Scene. We now go to Dr. Elliot Perlman, director of the NFL Medical Committee.
NFL players are less vulnerable to concussions and post-concussion syndrome than the general population. In fact, professional football players knocked unconscious can be returned to play on the same day of their injury without significant risk. Look, there's no magic number for how many concussions is too many concussions. Concussions are just an occupational risk. Concussions, I think, is one of these packed journalism issues, frankly. The problem is it's a journalistic issue. So where's the science coming from? From nowhere. Let's be honest. Whatever this Amalu wants his science to say, NFL players are the biggest, strongest, toughest men in the world. They have evolved to a state where their brains are actually less susceptible to injury. I actually set veterans back in more quickly than rookies. They know how to unscramble their brains a little faster. A rookie won't know what's happened to him and will be a little panicky. The veterans expect the hits. They want the hits.
Remember, that's from the NFL Medical Committee that wants to keep players in the game. Next scene. Sports fans, and frankly, all Americans across the nation, are stunned today by the suicide of 42-year-old Hall of Famer Junior Seau, one of the football's most beloved, revered, and feared players, who this morning committed suicide. Seau shot himself in the heart.
So a few things to point out. Shortly after Hall of Fame linebacker Junior Seau shot himself in the heart, more than 4,500 retired NFL players sued the NFL for concealing the dangers of concussions. The NFL proposed a settlement in which former NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue and Dr. Elliot Perlman would never be questioned under oath, and the league would never have to disclose what it knew about concussion-related brain problems or when it knew it. In 2015, actuaries hired by the NFL concluded that 33% of all retired professional football players will suffer serious cognitive impairment, including CTE, in their lifetime.
So, I would suggest that people watch this film, especially if your kid's coming home and saying, I want to play football. Maybe sit down with the kid all together as a family and watch it.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to our show, to our podcast. And please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies. This is Charlie Navarrete. And from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., death is nothing, but to live defeated and inglorious is to die daily. The fear of death follows from the fear of life.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.